Hey folks, happy Wednesday. Hope everybody's doing well. So for tonight's show, we're going to be talking about the Who. Ben, it's been around for as long as I can remember, and they put out some incredible stuff. And they're out now, as far as I know. Pete and Roger actually are still out there touring. And if you get an opportunity, you should go check them out because I did not too long ago, and it was an absolutely fantastic show. Fantastic show. So, without further ado, let me bring my two guests in here to help me talk about the Who. We have with us Pete Pardo from Sea of Tranquility and Mr. Martin Popoff. How are you, gentlemen, tonight?
Doing great. Looking forward to this.
Doing good, Hack.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this show because there's a lot to talk about when you talk about the Who. They're definitely not a one-dimensional band. There's a lot going on with these guys, and there always has been. So, yeah, looking forward to it. So, we just say hello to a few people that are in here early. Master of Reality, welcome. There's Poo Ninja, nice to see you. Tyler Patterson, Rebel Rocker, welcome everybody. Music Therapy Laz, Janice Lala, Papa Blue, welcome everybody. Welcome to the show. So, I always start with the same question. What was your first exposure to the Who? What got you interested in the band? So I'll just start with Pete, and then we'll go to Martin.
Yeah, I mean, they were one of those bands that I remember liking quite a bit when I was like 10, 11 years old. I was already a Kiss fan, and I listened to a lot of FM and AM radio back in the day, and you heard the Who all the time.
Yeah,
especially like their late 60s and early mid 70s hits and songs and whatnot. But I really, really got the hook when they put out that Kids Are All Right film and soundtrack, because I remember getting that soundtrack for either my birthday or Christmas, and my birthday comes right after Christmas, so it was either or. And I remember listening to that to death and seeing the movie on I guess cable, because we got cable like in the late 70s, and it played on there, and I was just became a huge Who fan from there. And then I went and started picking up all the albums and whatnot. But unfortunately, I became a real fan after Keith already had left this world. So, but I've always liked them. I've seen them live numerous times. Really great band, and probably even a better live band. I know we're talking about studio albums today, but man, some of their live recordings, and again, seeing them live a bunch of times, they were a band made for the stage. And Martin and I have talked about this a million times. It's like the Who were four very unique individuals, total rock stars, and you take like one of those guys out of the equation or two out of the equation, all of a sudden it's not quite the Who anymore, but one of the great four pieces, I think, of all time in rock and roll anyway.
Yeah, well, they made a lot of sound with three guys, that's for sure. Yeah. Martin, what about yourself?
I got into the Who late. I would have been 18, so it would have been Face Dances 1981, and I'm just trying to rack my brains and think back why. Well, why was my musical horizon started sort of expanding, once I got drums, and once you're in grade 12 and into first year university and all that kind of stuff. So I was more or less just into kind of heavy stuff until 77, 78 or whatever. And the Who was just this annoying kind of band that needed a fly swatter. Everything sounded funny and just buzzy. And it's like they're huge, but they're just old sounding and all that kind of stuff. So I was that kind of kid. And it was either because of Face Dances, or honestly, it might have been because of Empty Glass from Pete Townsend. I mean, I love that album to death. In fact, if we were to rank those records in with this catalog, I'd probably have two Pete albums before I'd have a single Who album. But I loved Empty Glass, but it might have been Face Dances and then into It's Hard. So I'm a very weird Who fan that way, I think.
So basically, you came on board, Martin, on the first of many farewell tours, right?
Oh yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Because that was 81, if I remember correctly. So yeah.
yeah. Yeah, you know, when I remember, I still have this memory when I was a kid. There's, well, I don't know, Martin, you might be familiar. We still have a channel now. It's changed. It used to be called Channel 79, and they would show these rock movies like on Friday nights and Saturday nights, and they would show stuff like, you know, like Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare. You know, they would show Phantom of the Paradise with Paul Williams. You know, stuff like that. All these kind of rock gothic kind of 70s things. And one night they showed Tommy, and I mean, I don't know, would have been maybe 10, maybe 11, and I'm like, oh my god, this is the coolest shit I've ever seen. It just absolutely blew me away, man. The movie was great, you know, and that whole soundtrack, and just, you know, and then Quadrophenia, like, so it really, for me, the movies, that's what drew me in. It was the movies, you know, and then you start listening to the music, and it's like, well, you know, they got other stuff too that's kind of cool, you know. But yeah, the Who for me, it's been kind of a, oh, like sort of like Martin, like in later years is really when I started to appreciate them. It's more when I started getting into music and wanting to play music and all that. That's when I really, you know, the appreciation grew for the Who. But yeah, early on, man, it was those movies that really hooked me, you know, when I was a kid. So yeah. Alrighty. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go around. We'll go Pete, Martin, and then myself. And what we're doing tonight is we are ranking their top 5 studio albums, our favorite studio albums, and in order. So yeah, let's start with Pete. What do you got for number 5?
All right. So let me preface this by saying, for me, when it comes to the Who, I'm a little weird when it comes to the Who and their discography. For me, there's 3 studio albums, and then there's everything else. And the everything else stuff is fine, but there's 3 studio albums. But if you were to ask me, you know, Pete, you can only take 2 Who albums on a desert island with you, I might not even take any of those studio albums, because for me, what I listen to the most is stuff like this, Isle of Wight, or Live at Leeds, or Woodstock, or, you know, Hull, all this kind of stuff. And for me, that is, the Who are a live band, and that's always what I really loved about them. And I love the live recordings. But you know, for this exercise, I definitely have picked out my favorite 5 studio albums. But again, there's 3, and then there's everything else. So one of the everything else coming at number 5 is the Who Sellout.
Sorry, guys. Somebody keeps calling me.
I was like, is that me? I was like, I couldn't
Oh
see.
no, somebody keeps calling me. I'm like doing a live show. Bad timing.
It happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Who Sellout, number 5. So what I've always called the Deodorant and Baked Beans album. This,
Yeah.
again, is right before Tommy, and a lot of cool stuff on here. You got Tattoo on here, I Can See for Miles, Armenia City in the Sky. It's fun. For me, the early Who albums are like, they're kind of still a singles band. They got the whole mod thing going, which is kind of cool, but a lot of really short songs, some kind of jokey songs. But I think Pete's songwriting is really starting to kind of take off by this time. It's not quite there yet, but a fun album. The album cover and everything is just as interesting, I think, as the music. It's this is just classic, corny, early Who stuff. But yeah, that's my number 5, the Who Sellout.
Cool. All right, Martin, what do you got for your number 5?
Well, I have a really weird ranking as well, but for completely different reasons, somewhat linked to what I just said of when I got into the Who. It's a bizarre ranking, but I'm going to start with Who's Next. You know, right off the bat, that's, I'm sure, a contrarian choice for being this low. But you know, as I move forward, I'm more into where they got later. This early stuff still, I've never been able to shake the whole noisy, chaotic, really old sounding feel, but it's got so many amazing classics. Baba O'Reilly is amazing, and Won't Get Fooled Again is amazing. I love Going Mobile, you know, with Pete singing. I mean, I'm a sucker for Pete. I want lots of Pete. And a lot of this stuff won't have a lot of Pete, but Yeah, getting in tune. I just think this is the album, of course, that just feels like the big greatest hits. You can't deny it. I'm sure it's going to be higher on both your lists, I imagine. But it is great, and it's just good to see them doing a straight between the eyes album after all actually a few different things that came before. This just feels like a very succinct, hard hitting Who album with all the ingredients of the Who. So that's my number 5. Who's next?
Who's next? Cool. So I just I mean I went through. I thought I had my 5, and then I went through, and of course I made a change. So this album actually was higher, but it came down. And the album I'm talking about is It's Hard. So this album was a timing thing. This came out in '82. I remember in high school when this record came out, it was like a huge deal. It was like, oh, a new Who record, and they're all kind of, they're because they were like the older band, but they were trying to sort of get into the sort of the new wave kind of look, short hair and all that, and trying to look a little more contemporary at the time. But it came out along the same times as their, like Pete mentioned, one of their earlier farewell tours, and they did the big show. I don't know, they simulcast it. I don't know if you remember this, Martin. They simulcast the concert for Maple Leaf Gardens, right?
Mm,
Anyway,
yeah.
so it
No,
was it was a big deal, and Kenny Jones and already on the drums, of course, and so on. But it's a good record. Athena title cut, great way to start. The keyboards on this sound a little bit dated. It is a record of its time. You can hear that right away. Um, the production on it too is also kind of thin sounding, but I mean, there's enough good songs on it that it got into my top 5, and also the time it came out kind of brings me back a little bit. But I've Known No War is a great song. One at a Time, Cry If You Want, Eminence Front, which has been a staple of theirs live ever since that song came out. But there's some '50s kind of reminiscent material. Why Did I Fall for That? But there's enough good songs in here that it did get into my top 5. And one thing, the album before this, Face Dances, one thing that I noticed right away, Face Dances being the first record with Kenny Jones. If you listen to, well, and you're a drummer, man, you probably appreciate this. His drumming is very, very sparse and very sort of timid, but by the time it gets to this record, they sound like a band. They didn't sound so much like a band on Face Dances. It was sort of, you could kind of get a vibe, like kind of feeling themselves out. But when they got to this record and the performances on this record, they just sounded a lot tighter, and they sounded much more like a band. So, but yeah, that's my number 5. It's Hard, 1982.
nice. Okay.
You
Do
know,
what you got for number 4.
Kenny's a really good drummer. I always liked him.
He's
I
awesome.
never liked him in the Who. I guess following Keith is kind of difficult
Yeah.
for
Well,
me. And again, we're talking about how
yeah.
when we all came on board with this band, right? So because I was already listening to him for a while when Kenny came into the band, it was tough for me. And as you can probably imagine, I probably don't look at those first couple of albums after Keith passed away as highly as other people do. There's good songs on them for sure, but for me,
Yeah.
it was never the same.
Yeah. I get that.
My number 4 is Who Are You, the last with Keith. Probably one of my favorite album covers by the band, who don't have a lot of really good ones, but great songs on here. I like the sound of this. Again, it's a little bit more toned down from the raucous Who earlier in the decade, but there's great stuff on here like Sister Disco. Trick of the Light is a great rocker. Guitar and Pen is very kind of charming and witty and quirky. The song is great. Everybody loves the title track. I've probably heard it more times than I need to at this point in my life. But yeah, great songs on here. 905, Had Enough. Very pleasing album, fun to listen to. It's not the big raucous Who that we remember, but it's still, I think it's this lineup, the classic lineup, on its kind of last legs right before Keith left. And he sounds pretty restrained on here, but I still think it's really good. I got some good vocals from both Pete and Roger on here, and the Ox. And it's a well-produced album, good sounding album. I enjoy it. Number 4.
What I've read about that record, I mean, Keith was in a bad sorts
Yeah.
around that time, and he, he'd show up, he hadn't rehearsed, he didn't know what he was supposed to be playing, and it was so part of it was that, and part of it, I think, the producer was basically asking him to kind of like scale back. So it's kind of the combination of the two. Yeah, there's not a lot of that thunderous, crazy Tom thing going on in that record. So,
Yeah.
but yeah. All
Cool
right,
song.
Mark, got for number 4.
Well, so who are you was my number 6. So it was my bubbling under, and I'm glad you picked It's Hard. I mean, it didn't make my list, but I mean, on that theme, I've got some curveballs coming, but I'm really glad to see you put It's Hard in there because I have a lot of time for that album. I play that record all the time.
It is good.
Yeah, it's one of my most played ones. But when in the cold light of day, I kind of like had to knock it out because I got some other ones. Starting with the first oddball, Endless Wire. I literally almost could have put this number 1. I am like a fanatic about this album. I'm just mesmerized by the way it's put together. All these short songs that are
Yeah.
total songs. I mean, these are like, there's a bunch of stuff on here that's a minute or 2 minutes long that just sounds like a total full song. And then when you get to the Wire and Glass mini opera, I mean, every song on it, I kind of went through it again just like a couple hours ago, and there's a song called Endless Wire, which they do a short version and a long version. It's my least favorite song on it. Okay. There's In the Ether, where Pete does that weird vocal. Otherwise, it's a pretty good song, but for the longest time, I didn't even think it was him singing that. And They Made My Dreams Come True, I'm not crazy about, but there's 21 songs on here, 18, 17, if you take out the doubles in the extended versions. And I love every other song. I love that there's so much Pete on here. I love that there's so much acoustic guitar on here. I love that it's kind of wistful and career retrospective, as is the Who album, the last one they made,
Yeah.
2019. I love the loops on here. There's not a lot of that kind of thing, but there's just a lot of acoustic guitar and not super heavy songs, but still rocking Who kind of songs. I think everything blends together and the production's better than you get on both Face Dances and It's Hard, which are granted a long time ago. But yeah, I thought you guys would probably both fire me if I rated this first. So I decided I can't go that far. And basically the comments, everybody's going to say I'm a complete idiot. But I mean, here it is even at number 4, which is bizarre. But my heart tells me this is my favorite Who album. It's my most played Who album. And
Wow.
like I say, at 21 songs, and 10 through 21 is this Wire and Glass, a mini opera, but it's not like a mini opera. It's just a bunch of cool, really cool Who songs with a couple of small repeated themes, but otherwise just absolutely amazing. I love the advanced single, Mike Post's theme. Yeah, just everything about it, the lyrics. And again, I think I like it the most because it's the most like All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes and Empty Glass. So there you go, my number 4.
You know what's
Cool.
funny, Martin? When that first came out, I reviewed it for Sea of Tranquility, and I loved it, and I gave it like, I don't know, 4 or 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I was
Wow.
raving about it, and people were like saying, "You're nuts." So basically, you're rating it as high as like Quadrophenia or Who's Next or Tommy. How is that possible?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, it's really good. It's the first thing we've heard from them in a while. It's very Pete driven. It's very artsy and all that.
Yeah.
But I gotta tell you, I don't think I've listened to that in like 15 years. I couldn't even tell you how any song on there goes.
Yeah.
It's just too complicated. It's got an extra DVD. The EP came out first. It's got 2 extended versions on it that are part of the album. It's just people think about it, they just get confused. They can't go back to it, right?
Yeah.
The first song's called Fragments, which isn't a fragment, it's a real song. But you think with the loop and then the fact that there's fragments of fragments later on, so that gets in your head like, oh, that's not a song, but it actually starts with a song. It's just really strange that way.
Wow. Cool. All right. So my number 4 is Who by Numbers, 1975. This came 2 years after their Quadrophenia, and this was an album, right? It wasn't a soundtrack. It was an album. It was just a collection of songs. And from what I understand, this was Pete's, at the time, I guess, his most personal record, because there's songs on here that are really very retrospective, about drinking and
Yeah.
aging and so on. And but there's a song on here that was "However Much I Booze." That's I love. That's a great tune. I mean, there's so many good songs on this. But apparently, from what I've read, the band was not very interested in doing any kind of recording. Like, this was very forced. They wanted to do other things. They spent more time hanging out, not getting anything done. But the result is still a really, really good record, and it sounds really good. And it has all the Whoisms, right? The Whoisms for me is, talking about Keith Moon, is that out of control drumming, just sort of like that whole random thing, and John Entwistle just playing every note he knows about 15 times, but within the context, and that I'll talk a little bit about more about that later, but within the context of the songs and everything, it works, and it sounds really, really cool. Dreaming from the Waste is great. Imagine a Man is great. um for me, my favorite song on this, and I love it, any song that, when they talk about their career and coming up and all that, the song Success Story. Love that song. That it's got a really cool riff, and it's super hooky. So I'm just looking at my notes here if I missed anything. Yeah, no, just a great collection of songs, and not songs associated with some project. So, so who making rock songs, and amazing sound on this. All their stuff, like, mid 70s and earlier, it just sounds really good. And it doesn't sound dated. It sounds like just a well recorded record. It doesn't sound dated at all. So, but yeah, that's my number 4, The Who by Numbers, 1975.
Yeah, that's Pete's album where he was really kind of doubting if he was losing his creative muse and just drowning himself in brandy. I mean, that's that whole
Yeah.
period of time was,
Well,
the guys were all having outside interest in solo albums and all that. And
yeah, they were all doing that, and he was thinking, like, at 30, he's like too old to do this anymore.
yeah, yeah. Could
How
you
old is
imagine, right?
How old is he now? It's like 70 something, and he's still, so yeah, yeah. And yeah, great record, great record. All right, what do we got for number 3, Pete?
All right. So remember I talked earlier about there's 3 albums to me that really, really matter. And it's not up for debate when it comes to my preference for this band. But it's how to rank the 3 of them that is difficult. So these 3 have flip flopped for most of my life as far as my favorite, my second favorite, my third favorite. So for this week, I've already changed these around a couple times. I'm not changing them anymore. I'm going to go with Quadrophenia as my number 3. This has been my favorite Who at times in my life. Ask me next week, it might be my favorite, right? It's just fantastic. This is one of the great concept albums in all of rock history. And amazingly, this band's got 2 of them that are just like mind-blowingly good, all within just a few short years from each other. Man, so many great songs on here. The Real Me, 515, Dr. Jimmy, Love Rain or Me. I mean, this is like the mature Who. And it's just fantastic. Some might argue maybe it's a little long. I don't know, but there's great horns on here, great, instrumentation. The drums are phenomenal. Roger is off the charts great on here. It's a really big sounding album, and I just dig it. Could be my favorite any other day. Today it's number 3, but it's my top 3 are like neck and neck pretty much. There's not much separating them at all.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right, Marian, what's your number 3?
My number 3 is The Who by Numbers. Again, I totally agree with you, Hack. I mean, I love these songs on here. I love However Much I Booze. Squeezebox is good, fun song. Slip Kid is your basic, pretty rocky, busy Who song, but not terribly heavy. Beautifully recorded. It's got a little bit of a pop element, so it's not just kind of aggressive and cantankerous, but it's got all of that ensemble playing that I love from these guys. I love Dreaming from the Waist, especially the chorus when it goes kind of mellow and poppy in there. Imagine a Man is amazing.
Yeah.
Success Story, I'm not that big a fan of, but I know what you mean. It's a neat lyric and it's got a neat riff to it as well. But Blue, Red, and Gray with the ukulele in there.
Yeah.
You get a little bit of Pete singing on this album, but it's Pete songs with Roger singing, and you in your head, without revisiting, you think it was Pete singing, but I go back and go, oh, what's Roger singing? But yeah, good sounding record. How Many Friends? Just again, it is like you guys say, it's one of these where there's a lot of Pete personality to it. It's well recorded. It's probably the lightest and most pleasing on the ear of the classic era Who albums, I imagine. So yeah, just got a lot of time for it. Really like the songs.
Yeah, I love that record.
A lot of nice acoustic tones from him on that album, more so than like the big brass electric guitars. Right? It's definitely a little more texture, I think, on that album.
Yeah, and it's cool to hear, a standalone record of songs, as because I mean they were doing, it was all thematic, either soundtracks for things or just concepts, and this is like a straight up album, and it was cool. It was very cool.
Yep.
Speaking of soundtracks for songs, so my number 3 is also Quadrophenia.
Okay.
That movie crushed me, man, and the music that went along with it is just, I mean, the songs are so good they didn't need to be attached to anything. They were just so damn good. You mentioned most of them already. 515, The Real Me, like just really really cool songs. This is one thing that I kind of want to mention, getting back to like the busyness and the way these guys play back in the day. I mean, these guys were so full of piss and vinegar, and just super aggressive. To my mind, the Who is like the first punk band, you know, um, in their attitude and just, but for them to tag along with Pete and be able to still be the Who, but still put together these like amazing soundscapes, it's just it's incredible, right? You would think you'd have to have very schooled musicians that would play very timidly to play these parts, but no, man, you got the Who just bursting at the seams doing these movie soundtracks, and you're like, man, it just works. It's incredible how it works, and it works so well. Usually it's the guitar player that's like it. Pete's the guy holding it down 90% of the time. He's the guy. Okay, we're still on this song. But yeah, it's amazing how they still managed to put a really good sounding recording together. And Pete is just a goddamn genius. I mean, that guy is, what he doesn't get enough credit as a guitar player. He's not, when you talk about, everybody thinks of like the shreddy guys and this and that, but that guy has such a massive vocabulary, like chords and textures and sounds, and he does play leads, but when he's not, very rarely does Pete Townsend play a guitar solo. What
Right.
Pete Townsend is doing is throughout the song he's playing lines. He's always playing lines. There's always a line going on with something else going on, and then his acoustic playing, and then the keyboards. I mean, the guy's just a phenomenal musician and just an amazing artist. And his canvas is music, and yeah, man, it blows me away every time I hear this stuff. It blows me away, But yeah, I could go on forever. But yeah, Quadrophenia, 1973, masterpiece. Amazing.
Yeah, one of the great rhythm guitar players of all time, I think.
Oh, yeah,
With
yeah.
a lot of cool riffs and things, and yeah,
And he plays so aggressively too, eh? Like
Yeah.
you see, on an acoustic guitar. Like I saw them live a few years ago, and so it was Pete and it was Roger, the guys that passed, of course. So they had a band, but they had like a little mini orchestra, and they did Quadrophenia. They were playing it, but they were playing it properly with all the parts. And oh my god, it just sounded incredible. And Roger's voice, he was knocking it out, right? He didn't lose his voice until the very last song, then he cracked. But up until that point, he actually held it together, and he sounded great. And there was a part of the show where Pete comes out with an acoustic guitar. He can slay you with an acoustic guitar. He was all by himself on the stage, and it just I was transfixed, man. This guy's incredible. You know, I got so much respect for Pete. It's crazy. Anyway, all right, I'll shut up. That's my number three. All right, I could go on forever. All right, what do we got for number two?
So before I divulge my number two, I was just thinking throughout like my time listening to this band, you look at their career and then you compare it to like the Stones or Led Zeppelin or any other of some of our favorite British bands from the late 60s and 70s, and they really didn't have a lot of album releases in the grand scheme of things compared to some of these other bands. And like, Can you imagine like if the Who were just a little more prolific during the 70s during their heyday? Because when you really look at it, Tommy was 69. Then you've got Who's Next, Quadrophenia, Who by Numbers, and Who Are You? That's it.
Yeah.
It's not a lot.
They weren't pumping them out, yeah.
No, they weren't. They had these long bouts of inactivity where some of these other bands were like cranking out an album a year or every other year. And it's just, you think what could have been if they were just a little bit more prolific and, maybe Keith didn't degenerate so much towards the end. But anyway, my number two, again, could be my number one. It has been my number one many times throughout my life. It's another concept album from the band Tommy. Love this album to death. Although I got to be honest, I like the version of this album even better played at Leeds.
Yeah.
Live. It's so much better. But I still love the studio version and just so many classic tracks. And the story is what it is. I mean, some people love it, some people don't. But I've been listening to Tommy for most of my life, and I just really, really love it. And there's it's just, to me, it's still a fun listen, and it's kind of proggy in spots, and it's cinematic and fun. And I think this is really the album where Roger really became Roger Daltrey that we know and love. But again, man, Pete was just writing all sorts of really neat stuff at this time, and I think his creative juices were just, at this point, it was just peaking right here. He was like the beginning of the great Pete Townsend songwriting run that you saw glimpses of it before this album, but here's where it kind of took off, and it didn't end for 6, 7, 8 years, something like that. So Tommy is my number two. Lots of fun. One of the great concept albums of all time.
I mean, I don't know what the hell was in the drinking water in England back in the late 60s, but I mean, everybody was coming up. Like all these bands, I mean, they were the Beatles, contemporaries of the Who. Like they, and just like the Who, they started off Can't Explain, little 3-chord songs, whatever. And within a matter of 3 or 4 years, they go from that to doing Tommy.
Yeah.
The Beatles go from I Want to Hold Your Hand to Sgt. Pepper.
Yep.
Like, what the hell was in the water, man? These guys just the development, and the creativity, and talking in a very like a real small window of time. It just blows your freaking mind when you think about it, right? Who's
LSD and marijuana, baby.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, because who's putting out Sgt. Pepper now? Who's doing Tommy now? Nobody's doing Tommy now.
No.
And these guys were doing it with just like the most basic recording tools available. I mean, Keith's or Pete's there spending hours and hours programming some loop on a keyboard, like where now you can suppress of a button, but nobody's doing that now. And he was doing it back then. I just, again, I'll shut up. I keep going. All right, Martin, what do we got for number two?
Yeah, just another note on the whole spreading out so they had 4 records from the 80s through to the end, and so they've got to be one of the most occasional bands, because the Stones, they kind of participated through the 80s, AC/DC participated through the 80s, and then both of those started stretching out to Who-like proportions, more or less, right? But you think of maybe Fleetwood Mac or the Eagles or whatever, but the Who are one of these bands that just seemed like they were never officially or for a long time broken up, or even for a long time not on tour. There's a few periods there where there's a few years, but they're just, the albums are just really kind of on the side thing, and it wasn't like Pete was making a ton of solo albums either. It wasn't like he had this whole other thing going. You know, he did pretty good in the 80s, but you know, after that you get your Iron Man and your Psychoderelict or whatever, right? But so yeah, that I find that kind of interesting about them as well, that we only got 4 records later. So my number 2 is Face Dances. Definitely a you know, sentimental favorite, but I loved You Better You Bet as a single. I love the poppiness on here. Don't Let Go the Coat. Cash Cash. Did You Steal My Money? There's a lot of songs on here where there's kind of rocky stuff, but when you get to the chorus or the pre-chorus, there's a beautiful Pete kind of melodic arrangement. It's funny, this whole topic of Kenny Jones versus Keith Moon never really bothered me with the Who at all. You know, I pay attention to drummers and think about drummers and know about them and all that stuff, but it never really bothered me that that it wasn't Keith drumming on these records. Because to me, it really was always all about the songs. I mean, it was a little more entertaining with Keith, but it was fine with Kenny as well. So I like kind of the blend of whatever, you know, everything that happens. I love Daily Records. Again, as poppy as it gets, I love the chorus of Another Tricky Day. Did You Steal My Money's kind of a cool one with that weird little beat. That reminds me of Keep on Working or whatever, you know, the one off of Empty Glass, kind of just a really comedic sort of vocal line on it. But yeah, play this one all the time. Still love it. I definitely like it. I think more than It's Hard. It had to bump It's Hard off. But yeah, here it is at number 2, Face Dances.
Cool. Yeah, I always loved You Better. What's the property of that song?
You better you bet.
You better
Yeah.
you bet. Yeah, I remember that. That got a ton of play on the radio, and that was that's a really good song. Very hooky, very cool. Yeah, my number 2 is Who's Next, 1971. Songs again. This was, from what I understand, also part of another concept record, the Lighthouse Project, that never came to fruition. So they just just recorded an album with the songs, but the songs again are so good. I mean, didn't have to be a part of anything. They're just phenomenal songs. And it's the Who, like, just aggression and mayhem. I mean, when you listen to these guys, they always sound like they're just on the verge of going out of control, right? It's controlled mayhem, I guess, is the best way to describe it. And this album has got all kinds of that. Like, they're just, you know, full of piss and vinegar. And I mean, there's every track. I mean, I'm looking at highlights here. I love Bargain. Bargain is a fantastic song. Going Mobile, Behind Blue Eyes, Bob O'Reilly, that's been played a lot. Still a good song though. And the production again in the album just sounds great. It doesn't sound dated at all. It's big sounding, the fine drums and the bass. The only thing I would like is if the drums had a little more bottom, right? There's not enough bottom on the drums for me. And of course, this is the home of probably one of my top 3 favorite Who songs, which I never get tired of listening to, and Won't Get Fooled Again. Just a beautiful song. Yeah. And again, it's Townsend, just a master of weaving different textures and rhythms together, making the songs interesting, you know, and he does it so seamlessly that the songs still flow beautifully, right? His songwriting is like incredible, you know. Yeah, that's I'm just looking here. Yeah, man. Who's Next? That is a classic. If somebody had never heard the Who and they said, "What album should I listen to?" That would probably be the one I would say. Go listen to that record, and you'll know what the Who's all about. Yeah, yeah. All right, Pete. What do we got for number 1?
Who is next, you might ask, right?
Yeah.
Number 1. When you really think about it, I'm sitting here looking through the track list. It's pretty much a perfect album. I mean, there's not a weak song on it anyway. I think, like, today, I don't really need to hear Bob O'Reilly Won't Be Fooled Again much anymore, because I've heard those songs like a million times. But everything in between is just, I mean, Bargain, Loving for Keeping, My Wife, The Song Is Over, just terrific song. Getting in Tune, Going Mobile, and Behind Blue Eyes. I mean, there's just no let up at all in the whole sequencing of the album. Just really, really creative, great songs, great melodies. Production, like you mentioned, Hack, is just stellar. I love Pete's guitar tone on the whole album, and Keith is spectacular. Roger sounds good. Entwistle sounds great. And, you know, you talk about the original concept of this album, and then you go and, like, if you have the you know, the deluxe edition, which I have here, and you go look at all the stuff that made up the whole Lifehouse sessions initially. I mean, some great songs that were being written during that period as well. So, like, if you were like a great what if moment would be like if we ever could get that album as it originally was intended to be. It's, I mean, all these great songs, you know, Water, and then all this other stuff. I mean, just pure and easy, just fantastic, fantastic stuff. And yeah, it's a great album. It's, like I said, it's my number one today. It's, generally speaking, either number one, number two, or number three. And I agree with you. If I were to walk up to someone, talk about the Who, and they're like, "Well, I've never had a Who album. What's the best place to start?" This is the best place to start.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Without question, because, you know, Tommy is not for everybody. Quadrophenia is not for everybody. And you could say, you know, one of the live albums, but then, you know, you're really only getting the early stuff. But I think that Who's Next is just, it's one of those Desert Island discs, I think. And most people, you know, it's very rare you come across someone who either has never heard it or never owned it if they're a rock and roll fan and have been around for the last, you know, 40 or 50 years. But yeah, it's an absolute classic.
Yeah, I totally agree with all those sentiments. Yes. All right, Martin.
All right. I just wanted to make a comment about, you know, Pete as a guitar player first. I mean, it's funny, on a lot of these songs, it's like Roger Daltrey is like the only bass player in the band. He's the only guy holding down anything traditional half the time, right? Because John Entwistle's a funny guy in that he's more of a traditional bass player of like a 60s bass player who will extrapolate and do like these 10 other bass things that bass players do, but he's definitely not hanging around holding down the note. Pete's exactly the same way. As a rhythm guitarist, he's like firing little licks all over the place all the time, right? And then Keith, of course, is playing the clumpy lead drum sort of thing. I remember seeing a quote that John said about Keith, which was really cool, because at one point Keith had his tom-toms, and then he added another row of tom-toms behind them, right? And Pete said, John said Keith needed that because he plays drums like a skier. He moves his arms forward like this. So he's like, he has to do toms like here, you know, going like this all the time, which is really funny. So I always thought that was a cool quote. But and so you can hear that all over my number one album, which I went with Quadrophenia. There's the big director's cut box set. And I took out the booklet from the original vinyl because the booklet is crucial to what goes on, because there's like 40 pages of these highly composed, well put together. It's almost like a film in itself before there was a film of the whole story. I love the story, but starting with the music, first of all, I really like the fact that it is separated into pretty good, decent songs. You get small bits of recurring themes, and then you get the two big instrumentals that recur the themes the most with Quadrophenia and The Rock. But other than that, everything's you know, just a good, cool song. A lot of people have had complaints about it, saying that the arrangements are actually all quite similar to what goes on throughout the songs, meaning that most of them are pretty full band and combative, but there's still a lot of variety. I'd say my favorite on it is I've Had Enough, which is a pretty heavy one on it. And Love Reign Over Me is amazing as well. But I just like the story. I think the one part of the story that doesn't come off very well is the quadrophenic nature of Jimmy. This whole idea that in Jimmy is reflected all four members of the Who, and his personality is muddled, and he's this mod growing up realizing, am I still going to be a mod? You know, I've had good memories, I've had bad memories. And then you've got the themes, which are some of the not greatest songs other than Pete's with Love Reign O'er Me, but they don't really match up with Jimmy that well. So that part's kind of weird, because even later on, there's this weird subplot narrative storyline of Jimmy going to see the Who and realizing that they're not heroes after all, and was Jimmy a failed musician as well? There's all this kind of like murky part that people put together. Pete's a star at adding to the story after the fact in the amazing interviews he does all the time, right? So he's a great guy for like really making you like the record more by selling it, by coming up with all this stuff that maybe wasn't in the original story, because you got the lyrics and you also got the pictures, and then you've got like a big long essay to go with it as well. But the main part of it is amazing, including the whole you know uh, Jimmy, it's pretty much known that Jimmy doesn't commit suicide, um, because what happens at the end is he goes to Brighton. He kind of relives the thought of the love interest thing, and then seeing Ace Face, who's Sting in the later movie in '79. But the
Yeah.
idea that this guy's just a bellboy, and
Little boy. Yeah.
relives the fights in the Brighton Beach with the rockers and all that stuff. But what he does do is he steals a boat. He jumps in the water, steals a boat, takes the boat out to a rock, hence the song The Rock, and sort of contemplates there. And this is where you get all the whole thing about his memories are getting cleansed and his soul's getting cleansed. This is all the Pete Townsend Mayor Baba teachings, right? And this is the Love Rain O'er Me, where he's like freezing cold from being in the water. It's raining on him. The boat drifts off, so presumably we learn he has to swim back. But this is all different than the movie, because in the movie he leaps off the bike and the bike goes over the cliff, right?
Yeah.
But in the beginning you see that he didn't die, like he wasn't on the bike when it went over. So this is more, the album is more aquatic, and the movie is more aerial, I suppose, right? But yeah, so there's all that's mixed into it with the lover's tears and the rain and the sweat and the the love rain o'er me and love water, and the whole thing about him being realizing the mysticalness of he's a drop of water in this grander thing of the ocean. And basically he like Pete says, it's an album about a kid who has a bad day. That's how he calls it, right? And so the idea is presumably he goes ashore and kind of grows up and grows out of the mod thing. So it's a really interesting story in a lot of ways. But yeah, just it's a well recorded album. Although there's always been complaints about it, right? John and Roger complained about. John complained about the bass. Roger complained about his vocals not being too. People have complained about the drums. But after, without reading those complaints, I think it's a good sounding Who album. It sounds perfectly fine. So,
Yeah.
I'd agree.
yeah, it's my number one. I'm a sucker for double albums. I'm a sucker for concept albums. I'm a sucker for big box sets. So, owning that director's cut box set and hearing all the demos and everything, I get a real appreciation for it. So there you go. Number one.
All right. Cool. So my number one, I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, is Tommy. And yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, all those. Yeah. I mean, again, great. The songs are great. They stand alone. When you listen to when you listen to the record, you have the overtures and everything all kind of chopped up, but all those little themes that come back, they're very hooky. Like, they're good. Like, they're really catchy. And then when they get fleshed out in the actual songs, I mean, you hear how great it is. 1969, man. It's like this came out in 69. you know um it's a masterpiece for me. And I just mentioned here again, like, what's incredible is the progression of Townsend's artistry in such a short amount of time, that he's able to put together something as cool as this. This is the work. I mean, what would he have been, like 20 mid 20s? You know, this is the work of like a mature musician who's been playing for all his life.
Mhm.
To come up with this, and this guy did it in his 20s. Like, it's just, that just blows my mind. Um, I don't know, too many highlights to mention. But for me, the my favorite is the very last cut. The "We're Not Gonna Take It," the "See Me, Feel Me," and "Listening to You." Oh my god, when I saw them, right? And well, I was gonna say Maple Leaf Gardens, ACC. I don't know, is it still ACC, Scotiabank?
No, it's not. It's not ACC anymore.
It's Scotiabank.
I think yes. I think it's Scotiabank now.
That's
Yeah.
what they call it now. Yeah, they keep changing. Anyways, when I saw them there, and they played Tommy, and there's Roger Daltrey doing the "See Me, Hear Me," I'm just like, that's it. I'm done. I'm just take me away now. That's it. Oh my god, I lost my shit. It was so cool. What else did I write here? Yeah, it goes back to one when I saw this movie at 10, and when I saw the movie, of course, it wasn't the original soundtrack. You had um, actually Kenny Jones played on the soundtrack of the movie. Did you know that? On the sound, not the movie, the actual movie. He was playing drums on that. Right?
Part of it, I think.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
how it works. Yeah.
Funny how it comes full circle, right? But yeah, you had why am I blanking on her name? Acid Queen. Whoa,
Tina Turner.
Tina Turner. So those were the versions that I heard. But yeah, but anyways, it just it's this for me is a masterpiece. This is like this thing will stand the test of time, and it sounds amazing, not dated at all. It sounds like this could have come out like a week ago, right? Actually, it would sound better than most things that are coming out now. I mean, yeah, I can't. Yeah, Tommy, I can't say enough about it. And when you watch them do it live, I'm sure you guys have seen this, right? The Isle of Wight show when they basically play all of this, and there's Pete with an SG standing through. No wonder he's deaf, right? He's like 3 feet in front of like a couple of high watt towers and just bashing away on these chords, and it's amazing. So if anybody there hasn't seen that yet, just go YouTube the Who Isle of Wight.
The
It's
whole performance
incredible.
is great.
It's incredible. And the timing is when he gets to the we're not going to take it, and at the very end, and that's when the sun starts coming up. It's like it's spectacular.
That's actually Woodstock, Hack.
Oh, is that Woodstock?
Woodstock, yeah.
Okay, yeah, but so wait a minute. I'm pretty sure. So
They played the whole thing at the Isle of Wight as well, but they played Woodstock. They went on stage at like 3 a.m.
5 in the morning or something. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
cross-referencing both
coming up.
shows. Yeah.
Yeah, so when they were finishing up Tommy, it was like 5:30 or 5:45 a.m. And as they were playing See Me,
Okay.
Feel Me, the sun was coming up right at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. I got
One of
my.
the most amazing things ever. I'm kind of, because I'm from New York and I live like an hour from the original Woodstock site. I've always been, since I was a kid, I've always been a fanatic about Woodstock history and lore and all that stuff. And that to me is one of like the coolest rock and roll performances ever, I think. And what the crazy thing is, as great as the performance was at Woodstock, they were all tripping on acid because Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead apparently dosed each one of them in one of their drinks, and they were all completely peaking on acid right about midway through their set. But if you go and you listen to it and watch the performance, it's like they seem perfectly fine, right? But you imagine how much they were freaking out inside, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I got my shows cross-referenced, but
the
anyways,
Isle of Wight is just as spectacular.
it's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. The Isle of Wight. That's the show where Pete was wearing like the white coveralls, right? Was that the
Yes.
one?
Yep.
And he's wearing the red. Okay. Yeah. So
he's wearing the white outfit, and Entwistle's wearing the skull outfit.
skeleton suit. Yeah.
Meanwhile, Roger's wearing the exact same outfit, right? The chest out, the frills, and everything like that.
Yeah,
looks ridiculous.
But back then,
so did John.
Cool,
that thing doesn't come off very good either.
No,
right?
the John thing doesn't come off. Well, Roger was like the Roger was like the Robert Plant, the god, right? The golden haired god swinging the mic,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. All right. Any comments you'd like to make about the Who or stuff you have coming up, Pete?
Coming up, well, we're going to rank the Cult coming up on Sea Tranquility. So for everybody watching, if you're a fan of the Cult, join Hack, Martin, myself, and Jamie Laszlo. Martin's going to sit in for a under the weather Chris Allo, so that's coming up probably later tonight. So stay tuned for that. We're doing that right after the show. So other than that, Martin and I have our show on Friday morning. We've got the Monsters Den tomorrow and all sorts of fun stuff happening over the next couple of days. So never a dull moment on Sea of Tranquility.
Cool. And I have the link to Pete's channel below. Martin, what about yourself? Anything coming up for you?
We've got the Contrarians, our YouTube channel. We've got I've got History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff podcast, and of course I write a lot of rock books, and that's all martinpopoff.com. But I just wanted to say one thing about Tommy.
Yeah.
That whole thing just creeped me out as a kid. I mean, I remember seeing that movie. I think I was more scared at that movie than I was The Exorcist. And I think I went to The Exorcist when it came out. I was 10 years old, and I think I saw that, somehow ended up seeing that like 10 times or something, right? But Tommy creeped me out completely. It's just so grainy and dark, and the movie or the story is weird. So I've never forgiven Tommy for that, and it's always been, no, I can't listen to this. It's just too dang depressing. It's just weird. So there you go.
Oh, that's hilarious. So, folks, if you're new to the channel, please consider liking and subscribing. That would be much appreciated. If you would like to support the channel as well, I have links below for hack merch. I've got t-shirts, I've got mugs, I've got hats. There's also a PayPal down there. That would be much appreciated. If you do not follow me on Facebook, I have a Guitar Hack group. I also have an Instagram. All of those are listed below. So that would be very much appreciated. And I would like again to thank these two gentlemen. We do this once a month. It's always a hell of a lot of fun. And yeah, so hopefully you guys all enjoyed the show. Thanks for coming, and we will catch you next month for another band, which we are yet to determine. But we'll definitely be doing something again next month. All right, take care, everybody. See you then.